All right, good evening and welcome to the Quarry Valley Unified Union School District July 18 meeting. If you'd all please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The first order of business is the approval of the agenda. A motion would be in order to approve the agenda.
I'll make the motion.
Motion by Mike. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. We have no public present this evening. Old business. Is there any old business to come before the board? New business. So we had discussed that tonight we're going to do a little preliminary budget discussion. And so what we had asked principals to do is to put together a wish list. And that's exactly what it is, a wish list, just like you're writing to Santa. So there's no guarantees, no promises. We're going to have building principals. You have a copy for reference, but we're going to have principals go through it and give us their explanation of why they're asking for these things. We're going to then hear from Lewis, and we're not going to be making any kind of significant decisions this evening on the budget. We're going to be looking more for directives to give back to Chris and the admin team. So that's something to think about as you're listening to their presentations this evening, okay? All right, so I guess we'll just start with what we have, and Joe, you are on top, so we'll let you start.
Actually, that's Kristen, but I can go on if you want. I'm on like page 3.
Oh, it says elementary and high school together, so, all right, we'll start with Kristen.
Okay, great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. You can see at the top, I have put in for I would like you to consider a 1.0 FTE classroom teacher for the upcoming school year. And I'm just basing that request on, or that suggestion, on our consistent or increased enrollment over the past 5 years. Currently, we have, for grades 4 through 6, we have an average of 24.5 students, and for grades K through 3, 15.75 per teacher. So I just think looking at those numbers, I'd like to be able to maybe talk about that moving into next year.
So, Kristen, can I just clarify? So when you say next year, are you talking about 23, 24, or 22?
Yes.
Okay,
sorry.
Okay.
Thank
no,
you.
thanks. We'll clarify. Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, I was gonna ask that question too. So.
And then there is, I did list general education instructional assistant to help with our MTSS work and help with meeting coverage and such, because we will be taking time away from student instruction to do what we have to do in order to move forward with our MTSS plan. So that would be a way to kind of bridge that gap.
Okay. Is that it?
Yes.
Okay. Joe?
So, good evening, everybody. Nice to be back in person here. I had put in for next year behavior specialists. We saw this year huge increase in not just behaviors in the building, but we're sharing one with the elementary school. We have her 1 day a week. We could have her 5 days a week and still not get everything done that we need with some of these kids. It just, the DCF calls, the crisis calls, trying to get help in mental health, and it's really just a lot of hours. It just, with especially last year with the students, the mental health piece is something we need. We have a school-based clinician, but she even said, I can't devote, I'm there to work with all kids, and just some of these kids need like an hour or two to get deep dives in and help them out. And she just, with over 200 kids, she can't do that. She's trying to, meet with these kids and get them through the day. I put in, after doing the MTSS thing a few weeks ago, a lot of it deals with interventionists. We've never had an interventionist since I've been principal at that school. So I put in for a math and ELA interventionist. Our family consumer science position, would still like to see that because of, just the electives and just the, one of the things with trying to keep kids in our buildings. Stafford's got a great program. Stafford's great for a lot of things, but, just the basics, cooking, sewing, it's an elective for our middle school students to have that experience group. We don't have a DARE program anymore or anything like that, and to work with some of these middle school kids and that type of thing. And then our nurse, we have Dr. Ciccarelli 4 days a week right now, and he's, told me he's probably got a couple years left. But when we were talking this spring, he said, you really need a full-time person here, someone here 5 days a week in the building. So I just threw that on his recommendation, put that in there as well.
Okay, great. Liz?
Sure. So Jen and I together were talking about continued unification amongst the buildings. And so we started by looking at facility needs, upcoming facility needs, and Jen, feel free to step in as needed, because some of these are really focused on the high school for the upcoming year. We are thinking about the elementary school and looking at the parking lot and it needing to be resurfaced in the coming years. And so there's quotes out there that we're looking to get right now with our facilities director. Did you want to jump in, Jen, before we move on?
So just a couple of these, the fire marshal was in the building, and some of our building doors are not ADA compliant or fire safe. There has to be a certain length of them, and so that is something that we'll need to do. There's some doors at Proctor Elementary that need to be replaced because they're not locking properly, so that's a safety issue for us. And then our heating system is coming up on 30 years, and as you know, they start to deteriorate. We have it looked at, inspected all the time, but just something to put on the board's plate as this might be coming up, and so we might want to prepare for that. We don't want to surprise anyone with something like that. And then as far as personnel goes, I believe we're the only two schools that don't have an official librarian shared among us, so just trying to bring that in. And then also do what the other schools do is, I think you guys, Pulteney has like a library aide too that you rotate, and so just trying to have that model consistent across Quarry Valley. Right now at the high school level, and I believe at the elementary, we are funding some of our interventionists through our school improvement grant. Continuous improvement grant. We're seeing some success, particularly at the high school with our math interventionist. A lot of our students that we did like a pilot group with our math interventionist, and those students grew, about 85% of them, a lot of growth over their targeted growth while working with an interventionist. And so it's been really successful for us, and we would like to continue that. Currently, that is funded through the SIP. We don't know if we will be on the SIP again, but just something to keep in your minds.
And the elementary school has the same SIP grant, so half of our interventionist is funded through that, and the other is locally funded. So just in anticipation of if we don't get the SIP grant for next year, it would be looking to continue with that full-time interventionist position, which would then have to be a 1 FTE locally funded. And then just again to continue with that unification amongst the schools in Proctor, and looking at Spanish and how that's coming at the high school, and we don't have that at the elementary school, and we're the only elementary school that doesn't have Spanish, and so we're just as a consideration maybe to bring into a Spanish teacher for the elementary experience, so that when they get to the senior high school, there's more looking to take levels 3 and 4 versus we don't have enough kids to fill. Those kinds of things. So those are just some suggestions that we had put together for consideration.
Okay. Joe? Or Jay, sorry.
Yep. Good evening, everybody. In my 3 years that I've been at West Rutland, one of the things I've really advocated for is infrastructure. We have a incredible building that has had a lot of deferred maintenance. So some of the things that I was looking at when we're considering where our needs are looking at roofs, An ongoing issue for the last 3 years is a main sewer line that goes from our 3rd floor out to the street that connects all the bathrooms in a stack. NBF has been working on trying to get contractors to even give us a bid of what that will cost. We replaced the primary furnace in 2020. We have a secondary furnace. Our furnaces work in tandem. We have a primary furnace that was replaced, and then when it gets really, really cold out, we have a second one that kicks in and helps boost. This is like when it's below probably 15, 20 degrees. So on those really cold mornings, and that one is doing okay, but it's also aging. One of the things that we had been talking about even before the tragic events at Uvalde was looking at both our fire and security systems, cameras, access control. Those are things that we need to be aware of. They have a lot of, especially with our access control, these are all computerized and they're working with old, I'm not a tech person, but it's old coding and trying to get any updates on them and being able to take control of some of this. We have to use an outside party to do this. It's actually quite cumbersome and pretty archaic these days with how we enter our building. It's a fob system. One of the things that has not been done is first floor window coverings. And this is like a one-way film that goes on, so you can't see in the building on the first floor. That is something that we're considering. And the other thing is a deteriorating buildings and grounds. For lack of a better word, it was a garage. It's more like a shed where we store our tractor. It's inhabited by lots of creatures. It does okay, but it really needs to have a little bit of love given to it. When it comes to personnel, the one thing that I am considering, and again, when I was working on our students, as any principal will tell you, students, this is the time of year where there's a lot of in and out of buildings. I had cited that actually I had 4 second graders leave at the end of the year. That's a large percentage of kids in one grade, and you can't control that. It doesn't mean that in another month I could get 3 kids in another grade come in. So it's projecting out what you think. And so one of the things, and I put that in my chart here, is we are growing in numbers. We had a very large kindergarten class, and looking at taking grade 6 this year is 1 teacher for 20 students. Next year, we'll have 27 students in grade 6 and looking at a second teacher for that. Now, the one thing I do want the board to understand is that I do recognize that if we continue with a small class in 2nd grade and they move to 3rd grade and we have those small numbers, I might not need a second teacher. I could move someone to cover that class if it continues to be small. So those are the types of things when you're projecting out for another fiscal year, that's very fluid. So I don't want folks to think that I'm demanding that. We just have to be responsive to our needs as enrollment goes up and down. So I did want to clarify on my last page under current staffing, I did not put down, I'm sorry, I feel a little behind the ball here. I do need to add that I have a school-based clinician, I have a school guidance counselor, and I also have a 7 through 12, what you would call a traditional guidance counselor. And when I saw their building principals had included those, I wanted to make sure folks do understand that we do have a clinician, a counselor that sees all students across all grade levels, and a 7 through 12 guidance counselor. And our math interventionist is a grant-funded position right now. So I just wanted, for clarity and accuracy, to let folks know where we're at.
Okay. So Louis, we're gonna kick it over to you, and Louis provided a handout also, and he's going to kind of go through some bullet points on this handout with respect to budget planning.
All right. So you should have a handout like looks like this in front of you, and then there was also the budget timeline that was in the packet. So this year we're starting the budget process early. Typically we don't start at the local level until October, where we start talking about just parameters for the budget, priorities, have just a quick board discussion to see where they want the budget season cycle to go this year. This year, we're trying to start a little bit earlier, do a deeper dive into the budget, try to get the board engaged in the conversation to see, to provide feedback, solutions, on prior, and we have a lot of new board members, so we want to make sure that they're familiar with the process. And so we're starting a few months early to try to give a lot more time for board members and for administrators to be able to make good decisions on the upcoming budget cycle. So typically, we end in January, hoping to be able to end in December this year, if timing allows. This way it gives us more time to prepare and market the budget to the public, prepare the town report, get all the reports out to the state and all that. So if you, in front of you, if you have the budget timeline, there's two columns. There's the supervisory union budget and then the district budget. So we'll focus today on the district budget. The SU budget we'll talk about more at the SU meeting, but we'll be moving up that process as well. So tonight we're talking about the timeline, talking about high-end or big overarching discussions, not getting down into the details or looking at specifics, looking for some feedback from the board on what they want to see come out of this budget, what they would like us to present to taxpayers in March. In the future meetings, August and September, we'll start diving down into more details, talking with administrators, asking questions about what's going on in their buildings, their needs, staffing, programs, stuff like that. And then the plan is to have a first draft of the budget presented in October. So there'll be a lot of discussions before that happens, but the actual details of the budget we'll look at when we get to October. I'll look at a second draft in November that will incorporate any discussions from the first draft, any changes, and then potentially the final and third draft in December. But we do have until the beginning of January if we need more time. I think it's just important that throughout this whole process that the board is providing feedback and asking the questions as early on as possible in the discussions. We don't want to get to the second, third draft and looking to finalize the budget and then throw a big question or concern into the mix and us have to really make quick decisions on whether it be adding staffing, subtracting staffing, stuff like that. So the earlier that we make this, have these discussions and make these changes, the better. So staffing by building, I think it's important this year we've talked that we look at enrollment trends and staff ratios by building. We need to start looking at our budget as Quarry Valley as a whole and stop looking at individual districts and start to try to utilizing staffing across buildings as much as possible. I'm recommending that this year when we present the budget that we look at it as a Quarry Valley budget and in summary and take away the different sections for each school. So when we're looking at instruction wages, we'll be just looking at one section and it'll have all Quarry Valley teachers' wages and teachers' benefits. Same thing when we look at principals, it'll have all principals lumped into that one category. There won't be a separate section for each school, and it's the reason for that is we have to try to start changing the mindset in our communities, in our schools, that we're individual schools, but just one district, and that we're going to share resources, move staff around if needed, and utilize and be able to provide more opportunities with the same staff that we have. ESSER positions, we will, right now we are on the tail end of ESSER 2. So ESSER 2 was $1.6 million. We've been utilizing ESSER 2 for this full year. We will be using some additional funds of ESSER 2 next year. The majority of those additional funds that we're using in ESSER 2 were to help fund positions, new positions that the board decided to fund in due to the results of the negotiated agreement We moved some of the new positions we are funding out of ESSER, so that it would have minimal impact on local budgets. This is just a one-year arrangement, starting in FY23 or FY24 budget. Those ramifications would be moved to the local budgets, because ESSER 2 will be completely spent. And we can look at more of those details as we get into the budget process, and what those numbers are and what those positions are. But just things to think about. ESSER 3, we have not started using yet. We're starting to use that this year. That is $3.6 million. We currently have that all accounted for, but we have the ability to shift things around as needed and as the boards decide. So we have some flexibility there, but ESSER 2 is all committed. I think we'll just take this by section and just and then go through questions. And then Act 46, so we'll just finish this one section. Act 46, it's just about really starting to try to fulfill the purpose of Act 46 and be able to look at shared opportunities, to be able to provide more for our students with what we have across buildings. And we've tried to do that, but we haven't really committed to it. And we're sharing a driver's ed teacher this year. We're sharing an athletic trainer, but we think we can do more with sharing classroom teachers, especially at the high school level. Being able to offer distance learning across buildings, whether it be AP classes or any other opportunities that we feel would be appropriate.
Questions?
So do you want to we'll stop there, take questions, discussion, and then we'll sort of move on to the next topics.
I have a question just about, and I don't know if you can answer this, Louis, or not, but the bullet point AP offerings lose students to early college Stafford.
We're not there yet.
Oh, okay.
We're still under staffing.
We're still doing, okay, sorry, I'll hold it. Sorry, jumped ahead.
So any questions, what Louis said about kind of a little bit of the directive for budgets, looking at the Quarry Valley budget as a whole, starting to present it in that manner to our communities, to the board, ESSER, and then just making stronger commitments to Act 46.
I mean, it sounds all good and everything, but all these schools are so far apart, sharing resources, teachers. I mean, what are we looking at there? Like, what's, how?
So, yeah, I mean, that's obviously something that when we meet with my administrators, that we have to take into consideration.
Yeah.
What is realistic? And I think that's where our goal would be, not just giving us like a percentage amount, but also just some directives in terms of what we're looking for. And as we look at excuse me, as we look at staffing, we would take, consideration that, but, we look at our G14, our policy, which is optimum class size. We also look at that there's a band for K through 3, which says no more than 20 students or per class, but then 4 through 12, it's 25. So as we look at some of our our class sizes, we have maybe two like 4th grade teachers for 24 students. And it's like, do we really need one of those teachers there next year? Can we just have a class of 24? It still falls below that 25, and then we shift over a staff member to, say, another elementary school that needs. So I think those are the types of discussions we have to have. Mm-hmm. Our goal, really, with budget discussion is that the students will benefit, and we're not going to ever do anything that's going to put the students at a disadvantage. And I think that's where, just to cut costs. But I think that's where a lot of our discussions will be there. I know that, last week it was that with Jen, Jay, and Joe, the high school principals, talk about some unifying steps. And there are a lot of things that we would like to do, but realistically we can't, because just right now geographically you can't have students move from one building to the next.
Exactly.
Or you can't really do like an AP bio class, through a hybrid. So these are things which maybe tomorrow night we'll talk a little bit more about visioning about where we see our Quarry Valley schools in 5 years and how to best, utilize these things. But I think with Louis, when we and I talk about these bullet points, we really looked at just getting back to just understanding what the needs of our admin team really is and how we can shift and adjust without continuing to add to our budget. And I think that's the biggest thing is, so if we really, prioritizing, say, staffing or, could be course offerings, then we look at, that becomes our priority, then, we may have to shift some things, some money from somewhere else, or just cut something, so it doesn't really fall on the priority, so. But you're right, so these are concerns, but I think that's why, when Louis and I talked a year ago, we wanted to start having these discussions now.
Yeah.
Because by the time we really go before, the vote, we really understand the impact of and you've had an opportunity to kind of weigh in with, community concerns as well, so.
Because you're right, it is all about the students, and I want to make sure everybody has the same opportunity throughout these three schools, because, right now, there is a big difference, and we do need to focus on that going forward.
Right, and I think we've spoken a lot about curriculum and course offerings here, and that's one of the things we see what Driver said, so maybe we're doing it, I don't know, and this could be completely wrong, but in the fall in Proctor and West Rutland, in the spring in Pulteney, those same opportunities could happen with, let's say, an AP course or marine biology, or maybe instead of just having Spanish, maybe we have German and French and those kinds of things. But those are, like Chris said, something we'll talk about tomorrow when we talk about vision, but, we know that we need to increase our course offerings, and we know that we need to, rise above just what those general ed kind of course offerings are. And so those are the things, now that we're all on one schedule, that allows us those opportunities when high school principals are setting down and building out that course schedule. If we know these things are available, how they can kind of build out that schedule and offer it to students. And that's how I think you see all students in every community have an opportunity at those courses without having to leave their home school.
Yeah, the intention is not to move students at all. It's potentially moving teachers around. And so if you have a teacher that specializes in chemistry, then they can maybe teach chemistry in one school in one semester and another school the next semester. But it's looking at those things and see what will work with the least amount of impact, but with the best opportunity for students. So. Okay. High school offerings, opportunities. I think it's just important to look at our schools too as, we're trying to sell a product. Our schools are the product, and we're trying to sell that to the students and the communities, and not just the students and communities or the students in our own communities, but even students outside of our communities. And so when students are looking at where they want to go to school, they're looking at the course offerings, they're looking at the athletics. So it's important that we're making our schools as marketable as possible to both the students that are in our communities as well as students outside of our communities. We generate quite a bit in revenue in some of our schools, and to continue to get those students and maybe increase that, it's important that we be as marketable as possible. And we also don't want to lose students to early college. It's great for the students, but when we're losing students to Stafford or early college, it does increase our expense. It has less kids in our buildings, which to a sense decreases how much we can offer if we're paying more to other outside activities or not generating as much in revenue. It affects our bottom line and how much we can offer to the students that are in our buildings. So it's important to keep the students in our buildings for both the budget as well as to be able to continue as much as we do and to increase those offerings to the students.
Oh, yes, okay, sorry. I was thinking AP before because we were talking about sharing resources, so sorry, I jumped ahead. I guess I was just gonna say, the early college, I just envision that being more and more, so sort of CCV is now gonna offer free tuition, et cetera. So, how do we, and it's sort of a general question, is how do we project that out? Jay was saying, trying to shift, seeing what happens in the fall versus the spring. You all have to shift things around, and what you have on this piece of paper now may change. You might get 5 new families in your school, right? But we also might, how do we predict sort of that junior and senior level in high school of folks, is there a way to do that in terms of? staffing and all of that too.
Well, there's a lot of forecasting that you have to do with that. And I think part of it is we have to, and it's something which we talked last week about. I know that Jay, Joe, and Jen, the three J's really throw me off, I'll be honest, but it's hard to say.
J cubed.
But we did talk about really, as we look at pathways, and, you
Yeah.
look at, I think we talked about 6 different pathways, and as we looked at, if a student finds himself on that pathway, what do our course offerings look like? And we found that some of the pathways were a little more sparse than others, and so that's why there are a lot of opportunities for those students, others not as many. And so what our goal really be as we look at course offerings is to have the potential to offer those if there is a need or an opportunity for those students. And we do know that right now in our schools, that's because of just, for a variety of reasons, that we do have a very general education offering, and I think it's that how do we kind of beef that up? And when I say beef that up in terms of more high interest courses for students who are along a variety of pathways, and so when our students are getting to the point where they are starting to look at post secondary or their sophomore year, junior year, they have options, and they start to really look in front of them, like what we're going to be at, but. The discussion about AP and dual enrollment, and we had this discussion where there are a lot of people in different camps. About AP. There's I know that there's International Baccalaureate, which people talk very highly of, which is which another program we're not going to look at. Or there are pros and cons to all of them. I think we have to look at what really benefits. But I think there's a blend too for some of these that just because we have a lot of early college or dual enrollment opportunities, there might still be opportunities to offer, AP courses for our students as well, what that may look like. But we also have to start look at enrollment sizes too. Does it make sense for us to offer a course for 4 students, and take up a staff allocation? So these are things which high schools are dealing with every year, and there is that fluctuation. I think you'll see, like, when we've put together a program of studies, it's really a program of things that we can offer if there's interest. And I think, but we have to work with our school counselors and our teachers and doing I say a better job because it's implying that they're not doing a good job.
Right.
But it really emphasizing earlier on in terms of what is that pathway, what are you looking for? So freshman year, we can then start to take a look at, hey, we have a group of students who in 2 years' time are going to need maybe a calculus course. And so we can then begin the staffing or there as well.
So when students are, and this is just an ignorance question on my part, just when students are part of an early college program, that's considered for our numbers in terms of enrollment a loss to us.
Correct.
Even that means that they're taking all their courses, right? So they're not just taking one course at CCB and the rest at their high school.
If you're taking early college, you have to unenroll from your high school.
From your high school, okay.
So we lose the
So
ADM
that's
credit
a
for that
little
student.
ADM. Okay.
And a secondary student is worth 1.13 weighted, so you're losing over 1 equalized pupil for that student.
And that is a public one state. That's a very good option for some of our students and our families.
yeah.
And so I know Lewis talks about ADM. It's not as if we're trying to just selfishly keep these students,
No, I get
right?
it, yeah, and
But-
I'm working in higher ed, so we're
Sure.
trying to get, like, I know how that works, but on the other end of it, so
Right.
that's why I'm trying to see it on
And
both sides.
Kristen,
But
that other
real-
example you gave was dual enrollment.
Yeah,
We can
okay.
do the dual enrollment in school, we have some courses there,
Right.
but if a kid takes one class at Castleton or CCB and the rest at their high school,
Right.
that's dual, just so,
So that's still part of our ADM if they're.
Yeah, because they can
Correct,
only
yeah.
take two
courses, right, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And then
Just wanted-
Stafford, they are also counted in our ADM for Stafford, but we're paying an additional cost
Cost for
to
that.
Stafford for that.
Right. And so that's why you would want to have a blend of AP and dual enrollment, because like I said, there's a limit on dual enrollment, but
Right.
there are no limits on AP. So a student who may be at the sophomore year is looking to really kind of bolster their
Right,
transcript of the resume, they would have an opportunity to do. But that's, they said these are discussions that we have to take a look at, and really, if we know that there's a group coming through or there's an interest, then, but that goes back to what we were saying also, how do we pool resources? And if we have 2 students at Poultney, one at West Rutland, one at Proctor, and we have 4 total kids, do we just say sorry and just, or how do we look at really combining that?
What
Or
pathway can we offer them
Right.
that
Or-
is best for them, but,
Correct.
Yeah.
right, also good for staffing, et
Right.
cetera, okay.
We don't want to
Thank you.
discourage or not offer early college. I mean, not
No,
that we
right,
have an
right,
option,
right.
but we want there to be other options for students that have utilized every class or that they need it for
right.
graduation, but we want there to be other options that, at the same level as the early college.
Or just for us to go back where maybe we were 5 to 10 years ago when we had a significant continuity of AP courses. So I didn't have to be a junior or senior to take an AP course.
Right.
If I was advanced as a freshman in math or science or English, that opportunity was available for me. And I think those are the places that we kind of need, in my opinion, to get back to. And that will start to change the general ed concept of the curriculums that currently exist within our schools.
All right, that clarifies it for me, thank you.
The last bullet under that category, just community service programs, it's just getting our students out in the community. I don't believe we currently have community service requirements in our graduation requirements, but the best way to sell our schools is to get our students out in the communities, or selling the budget as well as, and getting the students out in the communities, helping out and doing community service.
So, I feel bad, Louis, we should probably loop you in. So I just want to first, Joe, Jen, and Jay, and spent all last week working on a lot of things around unifying, just, so just want to commend them publicly for that. I think one of the components to talk about is, while we understand the need for community service, we actually would like to shift to more of a service learning based, because I think we looked at more the transformational impact of service learning as opposed to community service, where community service might be something you do, and then once you get the hours, I'm done, like drop, say, see you later, I'm done with the hours, while a service learner really be something that a student maybe chooses and really can make a powerful impact on, whether it be one of our local communities or the county, and kind of leave a bigger footprint. And one of the things we did talk about was having an end of the year, like a culminating project that board would be invited to, and just kind of it'd be something. But I think that's important for us to really have that connection back to our, whether it be our local communities or the local area, through this. So we discussed this, and but I think that's something you'll see tomorrow during our visioning, but also even when we look at during strategic planning. These are things which we're looking at 3 years, 5 years down the road of how we want to roll this out, because we also look at there is a cost to a certain extent with some of these things too, in terms of, are we going to staff this with someone whose sole responsibility is to oversee service learning? So will there be transportation costs? How will these are just things that we as a group have to discuss and talk about and come back. But so.
Anything else on that category? Staff wages, so in the last year, we had 2 big settlements. We settled the teacher contract for a 4-year agreement, which included FY '22, FY '23, '24, and '25. And then we had the ESP, which is support staff, paras, custodians, food service, and administrative assistants, and that was a 3-year agreement for FY '22, '23, and '24. So I think when we're looking at budget, we're going to see the impacts of those settlements on our budget, and I don't have those numbers yet and what the full impact will be, but I just think that's something that we'll have to work through, and looking at what those impacts are and how it affects our budget as a whole. Non-union employees aren't part of the bargaining agreements, and so they haven't had, just looking at the increases that were given to the union employees versus the non-union employees, I think it's important for both retention and recruitment, and that we look at certain categories of our non-union employees and make sure that we're continuing to be competitive with other schools and other businesses in the area. The cost of losing a valued employee could be substantial for training and the effect it could have on one of our buildings. So it's looking, and especially in today's market, and trying to find a replacement. So it's looking at those non-union wages and trying to be and to remain competitive. So we'll bring details on those specific categories and recommendations on what we think we need to do there. Any comments on staff wages? Food service. So this year the legislators decided to offer free meals, and the state is paying for that through the Ed Fund. It's requiring that all schools move to either Provision 2 or CEP, which are two programs in the state that you can use to offer free meals. And those programs are available even when it's not free meals for everybody. That's state-driven. The way Provision 2 works is you're being reimbursed based on the number of free and reduced applications you have, or approved free and reduced applications, and you're getting a certain reimbursement. So in this year, since the state is paying for it out of the Ed Fund, we're getting the same reimbursement as the free and reduced normally works in the National School Lunch Program, and then the paid piece they're paying for out of the Ed Fund. We're not sure what it's going to look like for the following year, so FY24. There is talk about it extending, and the money that they use to fund that for FY23 is no longer there. They use the surplus. So we're not sure how that'll impact, whether it'll be a local expense or a state expense that'll eventually flow down through the yield and an increased tax rates. But that's something that we'll need to consider and look at when making decisions for next year for budget. And then 2024 food service bid. So we're currently in a contract that can be renewed up to 4 times, so a total of 5 years. This year that we're going into right now is our 5th year. So we will have to go back out to bid for FY24. Not anticipating any significant changes compared to where we are now, but there's a lot of unknowns with inflation these days. We did see a 6.8% increase in our food prices for next year and the prices that we were being charged. So I would anticipate if inflation stays high that we can see a pretty costly bid for the following year. Hopefully we see some relief before we put out those bid documents. Any questions on food service?
You said it's for 2024 we go out.
FY24, so that would be 23-24 school year, yeah. Summer program, we've been offering summer program the last 2 years through ESSER funds. We are still planning on using ESSER funds for at least one more year for summer programming, but when those funds start to be drawn down, we need to look to make decisions on what we want the future of summer program to be in Quarry Valley or across the SU, and whether we're still going to continue to offer programs and how we're going to fund them. We've talked about regional hubs across the SUs to be able to maximize on our staffing and offer opportunities that's not duplicating across towns. That's in the very early stages. We haven't really made any decisions or had detailed discussions, but the current model is not sustainable past ESSER funding, so we do need to make some changes or make some decisions. Some schools are having bigger programs than others, so it doesn't impact all schools at the same level. Especially the high schools usually have smaller programs than the elementary schools. Facilities planning. So just looking at staffing, 5-year plans, the impacts or potential impacts of PCBs. We do have the assessment that was done by the outside organization last year. We've kind of tabled that for now, but at some point I think it's important for us to look at it and come up with our own 5-year plan based on that evaluation. Fuel right now is doubled what we have budgeted for this current year, double what we paid last year. So not sure what those impacts will be and whether we'll see some relief before we start heating. I've recommended to all buildings not to fill up until we absolutely need to, with hopes that we'll start to see some reductions in fuel prices. I'm hoping to be able to go out to bid sometime in August. Hopefully we'll see some decrease in fuel prices before then. But the best bet, we may be better off going with a variable rate for next year, because we really don't know where they'll go. Those schools that have the option of using pellets should continue to do so at this time. I don't see any immediate relief. I would imagine that'll be your source of heating for the following year. Any questions on summer programming, facilities, discussions? I know there's a lot of deferred maintenance in some of our buildings, and we did throw a good size of surplus into that capital maintenance fund. So I think it's important that we look at those projects and prioritize which ones will are a priority based on building deterioration, safety, security, as well as efficiency.
Louis, just my recommendation would be, I know we talked about a facilities committee in Quarry Valley, but maybe getting the facilities committee together, start taking a look at that and working with developing a plan to assist the admins and make some recommendations to the board. So,
Okay, we could discuss that tomorrow evening also.
And lastly, it's just really setting some parameters, and I think this is the most important. So I think a lot of the stuff we've talked about tonight is behind-the-scenes stuff that the administrators will work on with me and Chris, and make proposals to the board, and give you the details and the information. But in order for us to make good decisions and know what the board wants to see in the upcoming presentations, it's important for the board to give us some of your own parameters, priorities, so that we really know which direction we want to go in.
We go back to staffing for a minute. I just have a quick question. By these numbers, I guess this is all for all the principals. Are IAs just for the IEP students, or are they actually in the classrooms for these younger kids?
So we, in my time here, I was going to year 5, I know there's been an emphasis on shifting away from having a general ed para to so if there's a paraprofessional classroom, it is based upon a student need, whether it be through an IEP or a 504, but we are looking to move away from just having a para in the classroom to have a para in the classroom.
Okay.
So,
All right. Thank you.
yep.
The pre-K classrooms each have one para. That's the exception.
Okay.
Thanks,
All right. But not K1 or 2 or anything?
No, and I think the other IAs are like library assistant. I think they're classified under para too.
They've been
like
utilized in
general.
a variety of ways to kind of fill some gaps.
Yeah.
And so, right.
Okay.
Thanks, Jeff.
So one teacher's in charge of, I guess, half, if there's 2 teachers, then.
Right,
Just
so
one-
if you look at, right now, according to our, like say, according to policy G14, I'll just go with that, that a class of 24, everybody should have a classroom teacher in the classroom. Now, I know that is something which, up for discussion, because, I'll be honest, 24 kids can be, depends on the 24 kids you have in front of you. You could have, you have 6 kids and have the best class, 6 kids can be the worst class in the world. You have 20. It just really depends on the dynamic and the makeup, and there's that shift. And so, I think one of the things we're going to emphasize, and I've talking with the admin group about this as well, is through MTSS, is just really working with our classroom teachers on more effective classroom management strategies, being able to handle, the classrooms, classroom disruptions, and and being able to minimize those as well. But I think what we don't want to do is just throw someone in, to a classroom just to serve as a balancer, or that if there is going to be someone else in the classroom, that there's an educational value to that individual. Right. Right. And I think that's something which I worked in other districts where they have had classes of 35, 36, and say, well, we need to put an IA in there to help the teacher, and really it's more just to, as working with one group, monitoring and just keeping other kids in line. And so, but these are discussions that as an admin group we'll have in terms of if we really are making we look at numbers and say, we might say we only have 24 kids, and do we really need 2 teachers? But, Jay or Liz might sit there and say, in looking at this group and where they're at, we might look at data, we might look at, achievement scores, and say that this group really could, use, 2 instructors this year to really kind of get them back where they need to be, or this group would be fine with 1. So I think that's where there are a lot of different discussions, so it's
Yeah.
hard to operate sometimes in isolation when you just look at a number and say this, it's gonna
true.
be, so.
True, but all the IAs are for the IEP, because there's
There's
no-
been that movement away, correct, with the exception of pre-K or in serving in like at Proctor. I know there's a library, a media specialist, because we haven't been able to find a library media specialist, so an IA has been moved there just to keep that open, so.
Thanks.
Yep.
All right, so this is where board discussion begins, that we're giving direction to Louis, Chris, and building admin that what the board would like to see for the first draft. So would you like to see 4% increase from last year, or would you like to see a 1.5% increase over last year? Or would you like to see flat? So that's what we're looking at when we're talking about giving them some kind of direction, where to start, and that will help them with prioritizing, looking when they're looking at the wish list, when they're looking at facilities improvements, when they're doing all of this planning as they meet, having that number in mind. So, thoughts, comments?
Louis, can you just remind me how much do we put money in the capital fund that we set aside? The maintenance fund, do you know?
We put
approximately?
50% of our prior surplus,
Surplus
and our
was
surplus was
at-
about 1.3 million. So I think we put a $650,000 in.
Okay.
And I think we put approximately 250 into our extracurricular, co-curricular fund.
I guess,
Wish list and the buildings would come out of that. Needs to be paid there from the surplus, correct?
Correct. So those are the decisions the board will have to decide on how much we want to, which projects we want to take out of that fund versus put it in the budget.
And Louis, do you want to mention the bid threshold that has been increased? Maybe not everyone
Yep.
knows.
So the current bid threshold is $40,000, that's the state. So any projects over $40,000 need to go out to do an official bid, so advertise. We have to have 3 bidders. If there's less than 3 bidders, then we need to get a state waiver.
I think when you're talking about, increase, if you're talking about increase, are you talking about level increase with inflation consideration? Or are you looking at possibly increase because of inflation? Right
I
now,
think
we're
the
at about
increase that you
9%.
give would include inflation. I mean, the salaries and benefits will all already include that inflationary number.
The services and stuff like that are gonna be are gonna be inflated, are gonna be cost because of inflation.
Right.
And when we're looking at tax rate, there's a lot of factors that are outside our control. So we have control over the tax, the total expense and to some degree education spending. But then equalized pupils, which has a big impact, is really based on students coming and going. The yield is set by the state. We've seen some pretty large increases in the yield, which benefit tax rates over the last 2 years, and that's basically due to surplus. We know that surplus is now dwindling, so we don't know where the yield will go next year. And CLA, that's another huge impact. And the way home sales have been going, we did see some increases in CLA last year. They were smaller than I thought they were, but that's probably because it's based on a 3-year average. So now if we have two years of the 3 years with high sale values, we can see CLA jump again, maybe more significantly. If you look at the houses and what they've been going for, it's kind of scary.
So when admin come back and Chris and Louis come back with the first round budget, they will have taken the wish list, gone through it, discussed, and prioritized and made decisions about what's on the wish list, i.e. personnel, those kinds of discussions. With respect to plant improvements or facilities improvements, if those are things that they should come back to us with those prioritized, and then this board will look and see what, if any of those, we want to expend those capital funds on. But in doing all of that, we also need to give them a percentage when they go back and look. So they know what they can build into the budget or what they can't build into the budget, and look at what we currently have or what they can move around and make work. So would the board be comfortable allowing them to say from 2.5 to 2.75? I mean, because I don't want to hold them, say, okay, the board said 2.5, when they come back, they say, well, it's really 2.68, and the board say, well, we said 2.5. So I think particularly when we look at the first round, there has to be a little wiggle room here about what we're allowing them to work with and make some adjustments, make some increases, make some changes, as they see fit based on student need. So
I think for me, it's really hard to just say, okay, this percentage or that percentage. Still, I know that that's what we need to do, but I'm just, because there's so much unknown still, and to know what that looks like in terms of the wish lists, so if we say, okay, 5%, what does that look like in terms of what's on the priority list that the admins have given us versus
Sure.
2.5, what does that look like? I mean, I guess we can do something like that, but I then don't want to say, well, since you only gave us a 5% look and a 2.5% look, that those are the only two now we're going to look at going forward. I want to be able to say, well, maybe it's 3 then, or maybe it's 4.5, or maybe it's 1.5, or, you know what I
Sure.
mean? Like if I say, okay, 2.5, Louis, that's what I don't want, it's July, like there's just so much still that we don't even know before August, before September's meeting. So anyway, does that make sense? Like I'm trying to figure out a way to give you directive, but also.
They have to have that path to
Right,
travel
right,
down,
right.
or
I know,
nothing can
I
be
know.
Put together, and
I know.
that's the beauty of the first draft, that's just what it is, the first draft, and things can be moved around. So, I mean, we could say 3%, that certainly gives you quite a bit of wiggle room, and yeah, fuel oil prices, I mean, I just called the other day to go out to bid. They've already gone down, they were at $4.50 and $4.75, so they're all saying that they're going down. Some places are saying they're not even offering contracts this year, so that's the other, conversation. But with respect to personnel, course offerings, facility improvements, those are all kind of known entities, whether we're going to look at ranking them and doing them, if we're going to look at, adding some of these positions. A lot of these positions are not necessarily based on classroom size. A couple of them were, but the bulk of them are more kind of overarching for schools. So even if you had 6 families move out, that's not going to really change some of the requests that are in here. And that's something, though, that these admin have to set and be able to look at each other face to face and make those decisions. Because as Louis said, what we really want to do this year is build that Quarry Valley budget as a whole, rather than, start building independently. We need to start looking at ourselves for that unification piece as Quarry Valley rather than independent schools.
And just to note that all of our staff are on Quarry Valley contracts.
Yes.
So we don't have, it's not a Polney teacher, Proctor teacher, West Rutland, so they are Quarry Valley teachers. So I think we also take a look at, we have a pool of teachers to problem solve, to take a look at their staffing needs. So it's not just, because we have some here, some there, we really have to take a look at our numbers, and we look at, here's our pool of teachers, and then how do we reallocate the staffing to best meet the needs? As I said, those are discussions we will have to have, so. And I know that will be a kind of a shock for some of our teachers to hear, but they're on a Quarry Valley contract, and, it's really, at the end of the day, it's our building admin's decision in terms of, where these teachers go within their buildings, or, we discuss within the Quarry Valley to best meet the needs, because, it's a resource, and if we find that, we have a third grade, and, one of our schools, look at data, really needs, we have a teacher who's doing a phenomenal job, well, we can reallocate or look at bringing that staff member in to really help meet those kids' needs. That's our part of our job to do, so.
All right.
So could we have consensus to give Louis, Chris, and the building admin a 3% number to work at for the first draft budget? They're going to prioritize facility improvement projects along with building admin and bring that back to us for a first look.
So I just want to say that percentage alone, when you look at the wish list, it's a wish list, and you can go 5%, you could, and 10%, it may not even cover all these items on the wish list. I think what we have to take a look at is sitting back down with, as a group and really taking a look at what are our needs and how do we move things around, and we might find that, 2% may get the job done, 3% may get the job done. There might be some things that we want to, like I said, defer to year 2 or year 3, kind of building things out, but those are discussions. So we're not just looking to add on to the existing budget. We really have to go through and, to gut the budget and really go back and just take a look at it and say, we're not necessarily going to go line by line, but if we need to find funds, we'll take a look at programs, look at resources, look at things and really make some hard decisions to say, do we need this? If it's something that's being used in one school, if every single school has 3 different reading programs, like moving forward, is that something which, like in year 3, we can solidly move to a reading program across all 3 buildings that we feel comfortable with, that we can actually get at a reduction in cost, as opposed to having 3 separate, but that's part of that unification. So there are a lot of discussions, I think, year 1, year 2, and so we'll talk more about this tomorrow night, but as we kind of vision where we want to be in year 3 or year 5, as we budget, we budget with that in mind as well.
Yeah, and we kind of started doing that a little bit last year when Jay came and we are piloting the program. So to kind of take those first looks to start doing those kinds of things.
Could we, if we do something around 3%, but can we also, in terms of facility and building needs, Louis, is it possible for you to say, well, if we have put in $650,000 approximately in that fund, how much of that fund could be used for X, Y, and Z things? Like, can we separate that out and not just be like, here's the 3%, but if we use this amount, then does that make sense?
We can leave all the major projects out.
Or just labeled.
Yep.
Yeah, so they should come back with the projects across all buildings.
Yeah.
Ranked, in terms of need, in terms of safety, in terms of, we don't think the furnace is gonna run this year, that kind of criteria. And, maybe you can even bring it back like first year, second year, third year, kind of look based maybe on some of these.
Like for non-ADA compliance stuff, I mean, that.
I will have to probably move on that this year alone, yeah.
But are there other federal grants for that kind of stuff for old school buildings?
I can certainly look into grants. Sometimes the grant money, you have to get it done, and then it's a process afterwards. And we have our own line item for something like that, but then it kind of takes it out of that particular budget that it.
So that's why that would be helpful, like when they meet, if they start, because Louis and Chris know, so that's a year 1 thing. Is year 2 is, this, year 3 could be this, so that helps us. 1, plan when we look at what we're taking out, and 2, what we think about at the end of the year, if we have a surplus that we want to put back in. Keeping in mind that we had this conversation last year when we kind of heatedly discussed how much money to put in, that there's not going to be a lot of surplus years like we've had. So we need to think about that too. I mean, the other conversation may be as they start talking about if we have multiple buildings with heating issues, is that going to, rise to the level of a bonding question, where we would do that somehow across Quarry Valley? Would that be, a better way to make those improvements rather than continually putting on a Band-Aid and expending those funds? Would it be better to do something like that? So, I mean, but that's something that group should be coming back to us with, for the first draft for the board to review and make those final decisions.
And I just want to piggyback on something Jen said. I think as we shift to looking at a Quarry Valley where, Jen had said, her line item, we may have, say, $10,000 budget in her line item, 10,000 in Jay's, 10,000 in Joe's, and Jen may have, $20,000 worth of work to be done, and the three of them sit down and say, look, I don't need all this money this year, and so really it's a pool of, $30,000, and so, Jen has the money, and, Jay says, look, this year, I really can get by with like $1,000, that's really all I need, I don't need all that money. While in the past, it's been, Jen looks at, well, how do we handle an overspend, and then we're looking to add, but then we handle a surplus, so it really is more that collective, responsibility of just, like I said, the three kind of thing, look, because there will be a time where Joe may need something, and then we're looking at, well, this year we have this item, and, that's been kind of allocated to us, but I don't need all of that, so it's like we can shift a little bit of that money, and I think that's more that collective vision with that, so that we kind of shifted away from, as opposed to just being restricted to a school-based budget, so.
%? Not hearing a lot of discussion. And this is only first draft, so, I mean, it's...
We've had in the past, like, total changeover in the
Yeah.
second draft, so, yeah.
Right, so, I mean, it's just some direction just to start going, and then, if you eviscerate it, then, again, we start.
And typically we do this, we have the first page, which is the summary of changes with any of the changes that are significant that we made to the budget with the amounts that those changes reflect. So, I mean, if we have a percentage, which is our goal, and then the board decides to make changes, we know exactly what changes we can make, if they were one of the changes that we already made, that we can either take out or add in or to,
Yeah. I think part of it is you have a lot of new people on the board doing budgets, so even to say what that definitive number is going to be right now is going to be really tough until that first draft comes around. And they also look at what the facility improvements look like, maybe broken out over year 1, 2, and 3. I think the goal should be perhaps as after we look at the first draft, that at that point, collectively as a board, we have a more defined number of what we don't want to exceed. I think that would be a little more realistic.
It's a little bit easier to wrap your head around when you
Right.
have the first draft, but I also know you need somewhere to go.
yeah.
So,
Well, we just, if we put all this together in the first draft and we're at 6%, we want to know what that target is so that we know potentially how deep we have to look
Yeah.
with the administrators and positions, and that takes time.
I can't imagine this board is going to say more than 3%. So I think if you say 3% going in the first draft, that we're going to be safe. I would just say collectively, thinking about some of the penny pinchers on the board.
Louis, is there a way to do like everything on that we're requesting on a wish list and see what percent that is, and then to have another option where we really, if it was at 6% or whatever, that, to
we
see
could
what
definitely have
percent
the
it comes out
budget.
to?
We could have the budget, and then we could have all the wish list items and as separate, and say what that would be if you put those in.
Oh,
It's
the
hard
a
to
la
manage two
carte?
separate budgets at this, yeah,
So
it's hard to
just know the
manage
board
two
likes
budgets
some
at the same
choices
time.
sometimes.
Facilities would be difficult because we don't really know the exact cost a lot of these.
Yeah.
Like personnel would be easier for us to figure, but when
Right.
you look at facilities, wide range.
I think we need to keep in mind now with the PCB thing coming up, when do our first schools get tested?
Supposed to be this summer, but
So-
we're
Oh,
waiting
It'll
to
be
hear back from the
anytime.
state.
We're
so-
waiting.
Are you waiting?
Yep.
Yes.
Right now, yeah, so I think that may have some impact on it, so I think maybe keeping that, I don't want to say separate, but it may have to be looked at in a slightly different way. You may say that, depending on what they find, you may say, well, geez, for buildings to keep us legal, we may need 5% there versus 3% in other areas. So it kind of goes back a little bit to what you was saying, is that you may have to have two, I don't want to say two budgets, but sort of two thinkings. Facilities is at one percentage, and the rest may be another percentage, because
Right, well, that,
I
yeah.
foresee that the state, in my opinion, may come into an area and say, there's enough schools, and I'm not talking about just our schools, I'm talking about schools all around us, that says, there's enough schools that we think we're gonna do something different. And one of those things we're thinking about doing different is not reimbursing you on repairing your school, which could be an impact to us.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was thinking about, sort of keeping, you could put it all in at 3%, but then having some sort of, like Jen was saying, like, if we went here, this is what this would look like. I know that's more work for you, Louis, but.
Well, we've done that
A lot of
before.
unknowns, yeah.
We've had that à la carte first pig,
Yeah.
but that's why I think it's important, the facility improvements that are currently here, and we kind of know from the report, to start breaking those out, just, with the exception of the PCB. I mean, if ADA has to be done, or if a door needs to be replaced, or something needs to be done to the furnace to assure that it's going to run, those are all kind of first-year budgeting issues, but the other things could be pushed out for a couple years.
So you just mentioned the report, and that was the report that we had that consulting group come and look, and so did these items come out of that report, or are these identified?
No, those were identified more from.
So do we have that?
So that's what Chris was talking about, that tomorrow night we'll talk about
okay.
with the facilities committee and kind of looking and reading through
We can
that.
look at that report.
That would be best as a facilities
Okay.
committee meets, takes a look at that, meets with Bill Evans, really, and then puts together a plan, action plan in terms of, in conjunction with myself and Louis, of what,
Yeah.
how to move forward with this.
Okay.
Put together our 5-year plan from it, not necessarily the plan that
Exactly,
they
right.
have.
Well, I'll just say this, and I think part of the issue with the proposal received is there are a lot of aesthetic
Right,
things
and
that really
we
were,
talked about that
like,
before.
sure, we can replace the lockers or just repaint just because it makes it look nicer,
Right.
replace a fixture, but it's not necessary. It just was, trying. And that was the biggest thing, is just really trying to get down to the nuts and bolts in terms of what do we really need to do, just to get our buildings where they need to be. So, and Mike, just real quick with the PCB, you're right. I think it's something which we are going to talk a little bit about, developing contingency plans for short and long term, within our buildings if there were to be a closure, but for whatever reason, just do mitigation. But I think every SU right now there's that stress in terms of you don't know. It could be very similar to what we had to do with lead testing, where hey, just change this faucet, or to something pretty big for closing school down for a duration of time. So
Because my concern is that we don't go put a new boiler in a building that the state may come in and say, that building's no good anymore.
or can we?
That-
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's just
That's all.
it's like with a car. It's like
Yeah.
how much money do you keep putting into a car if
you're
it's going to go in. So you got a nice new engine, but the frame's rusted through. So
Well, and the other issue is we don't know, even though once they come, how long it's
Oh,
going
yeah.
to take to receive the report.
well, I think I'll be honest. I think by them the state extended to 2025. I think they're just trying to really provide themselves some time, or schools like Bolton Elementary, or the early school, there'll be a lot of guinea pigs where they're working through and just understand, okay, how are we going to, I think, I'll be honest, I think sometimes it's like they're building the plane while they're flying it. So,
Sure.
So I think it's just, and so some of our schools and the RSU who are at the tail end will look a lot different than early on, so.
Yeah. Okay, so kind of the direction we're going to give to come back for first draft, 3%, keep the facilities, projects out of the regular budget, prioritize facility projects on year 1, 2, and 3, and come back with a feasible number that could be taken out of the sinking fund to fund those. And then the à la carte page with what these wish list requests look like, so that they could just be put in or taken out.
So the board will be updated on where we are with these wish list items if we approve. the
Yeah, so
3%.
like, so Lewis would come and say, okay, so the wish list was a full-time classroom teacher in Polton Elementary. The cost for that is X, right? And so then if you put that in, then this is what the budget increase is. If you take this out, something like that, so.
Yeah. Can we also be updated on what wasn't addressed in the wish list?
What's not there.
Yeah, what hasn't been acknowledged?
Yeah, I think we can address, I think one of the things that we're also going to ask from the board is just a little bit of trust that as we're meeting together, that we're making decisions that are in the best interest, that not everything is going to make it, like I said, it is a wish list. So there are some things we're prioritizing. And so it'd be great if we had all the money and we could just continue to add. That's not the reality of where we live in. So therefore, there are items on here where, we might say that, okay, we, need behaviorists, but within our building, we can look at shifting some things around, and we found a position for you. But that's, like I said, those are discussions that we will have. And I say this where, the building admins, myself, Louis, we're doing it on a daily basis, so, kind of understand the impact of adding something, taking something away. And I think our ultimate goal is that we don't want the students to be impacted. I think that would be the last thing. So obviously, staff, we that's the last thing we'd ever take a look at, cutting, but we have to look at and go through, just finding, like I said, finding the meat on the bone there. So that's just, it is a lot of work, but it'll be a good work for us to kind of work through, so.
Chris, I was, if I could, I was just going to say, having done budgets for almost a couple decades now, 70 to 80% of our budget is fixed. That's salary and benefits.
Right.
So we are looking at a smaller percentage than the sum. And I always have been, the 80% is somewhere around, that always been stuck with my past business managers. You have really control over 20% of an increase. The other thing that is going to be interesting to see federally is, are we going to be getting some school security funds? And that's something that I know at least at the federal level, and I'm not sure at the state level, but certainly at the federal level, something may be coming down the line which could help offset. Tom had talked about, we have the building, a surplus that has been set aside for buildings and grounds. Some of that could also be coming for some federal grants. It'd be interesting to see how that plays out as we get back to school in the fall. So those are just two things that we're burning in my brain.
And, Jay, you're right about there has been a lot of discussion, but the problem that we always have is, like, school security is not something that always can wait. We can't tell in a critical incident, hey, hold on till June, because we got to wait till our funds come through, and then we're ready to go.
Right.
You never. So I think that's part of our responsibility is the safety of our schools is paramount for students and staff. And so it's frustrating. So we might expend some funds, then 6 months, 7 months down the road, all of a sudden, hey, there's a grant that would have taken care of that. But I think that's something which we really have to take a look at, and obviously look at the state regs, what is expected for us, what we need to do in terms of, like, what's a nice to have or what's a must have. And I think it make sure our buildings are secure, and really going through that. I know that when I spoke with Rob last year, Rob Evans, there are a lot of that'd be nice to have, but not a lot of must-haves. And so, but like I said, I think we're going to find that with a lot of this, that they're throwing a lot of stuff at us, but the funding, they're still trying to figure out, well, how they're going to help us out, because there's just a lot of costs coming our way.
And even finding a vendor to then
well, that's you're right.
fulfill that project
Right.
is is really a daunting task.
Well, and also, is it gonna be a hardening of schools or the softening of schools in terms of like, do you do more of the preventive, like behavior specialists and more eyes on the ground kind of investment, or do you put more locks on or more security,
Right.
you know? Which way do you build that and what is the funding gonna be about? Is it gonna be for staffing? Or is it gonna, or
So-
what kind of staffing, if it's even included, you know, those kinds of things.
I
we
think
just
it's
don't know.
important also to, when you hear stuff like this come up, especially in the news, that you pay some attention to that. And it's worth our time sometimes to call our legislator, because he or she may be doing something in Montpelier that may directly affect us. But it also, you may have to call your senator or your congressman, because then they say, okay, now I'm getting some input from from school board members, community residents, about what we should be thinking about and how we should take care of that. So don't let them just sort of run it amok with it. If we give some input, then maybe we'll get something back that we can really use.
Well, I know we discussed bringing in some representative senators to our September, October
Yeah.
board meeting prior to, the next legislative session to really give some feedback in terms of, thoughts, opinions, and
And one of those things may be simply to say, look, if we've done an improvement, can we, and this grant comes along later, can we show that we've made the improvement and apply that grant sort of as a refund, if you will, or as a rebate, if you will? If they see that and make it, and put it part of the legislation, then that certainly helps us.
Yeah.
Instead of getting some money, okay, now we're gonna do this $100,000, we've already,
Right.
we
Already invested in
fool
it.
around, Lewis tries to find places to put it, keep it legal.
and Chris, I know you talked about the soft approach or the staffing. I think the concern that a lot of schools in Vermont have is there are things that come through the legislature that in theory they sound great, but then when you look at, it's not just a vendor, but you look at where we're going to find the staff that are qualified to do this, and so there is a rush for those staff members. You look at right now, special educators. There's a shortage in the state of Vermont, well, a lot of states, but so we look at, there are a lot of great things that sound great in theory, and say, well, here, you guys go find them, and it's like, well, we can't find them. They're just not there, and so there is that balanced approach. Things we'd like to do and things we realistically can do. So it's difficult.
I had just a question clarifying, and I probably have asked this before. The extracurricular fund, Lewis, can things like, things that have to do with our athletic fields or athletic facilities, can that, expenditures on that kind of stuff, can that come out of that, or was that more for like specifics?
So
like
we
uniforms
actually
and things like that?
included a line last year that gave every school $10,000,
Right.
which had not been in existence before,
Right.
to do that work on their fields. So,
10,000 total.
$10,000, yeah.
Yeah.
So-
Or whatever kind of, not everyone has fields, but you know what I mean, like.
Yeah,
doing
so,
that kind of stuff?
I mean,
Or is this more for like,
it's pretty flexible, the
Uniform,
funds.
okay.
It could be used for anything that the board decides for extracurricular or co-curricular. I mean, I would think the normal, just the everyday expenditures that you flow through your budget wouldn't be included.
Included in
This
that,
would be
okay.
more
Right.
of a larger cost that's
Okay.
like a one-time, I don't know.
Like if we were gonna upgrade a
Billboard.
playground perhaps,
Something like
or put something, what'd you say?
Billboard or something, scoreboard or something.
Oh,
like
a
that.
billboard, I was like,
Yeah.
a billboard.
Full advertisement on those.
or new lights or what, yeah, okay.
Uniforms are typically on a rotation
They're on
in
there.
the budgets, and they're included in the regular budgets.
Yeah.
And so is the normal maintenance and on the fields.
Okay.
And it was kind of
Right.
like also thinking about, so, I don't know, let's say we had, I don't know, a new club.
Club
Like,
or something,
we're gonna
yeah.
play polo this year. So we're going to buy, out of that, we're gonna buy horses and mallets for this year.
Right.
To see how it goes, because it's not something that is on the schedule and it's not something that's normal, so we're gonna try it. So, like before, we had actually funded the rock climbing club at one point, before we were merged like that together, to try like new things.
Okay.
Bass fishing, yeah. I think bass fishing, we always kind of included in our, in our budget, yeah, because that's a Quarry Valley.
Buy a boat. You
What?
could buy a boat.
Yeah, if we're gonna buy a boat, yeah.
Fun boat, Mercury.
That'd be a good chunk of that.
To be pulled by our new pickup.
Yeah. Yeah,
New trailer, new, yeah.
yeah.
Store it.
If we bring our own skis.
Right, there you go.
Hey, the fish could go to the schools to fund, you know.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so are we good with, are you good, Louis, with coming back with first draft?
I'm good, yep.
Okay.
We'll target the 3%, and if in the meantime, there's anything that the board thinks of that they want to see as far as presentations or information,
Okay,
just let us know that information.
okay.
I would say don't be afraid of detail.
Yeah.
We'll cut it if we have to in terms of timing, but don't be afraid of detail,
Yeah.
especially for,
I think the à la carte page is fine. I
Yeah.
think the way you've done that in the past, has enough detail generally on that to, and I think, just the plan for facilities.
Would that
And
be for
then-
the September board meeting or for the August? Because I know we've talked, August we moved.
We weren't gonna require, building principals to come in August.
Correct.
So I think,
I won't have a budget by
yeah,
August.
September would be
I
fine.
just want to,
Yeah.
Florida trip, Louis?
According to the, well, the timeline has it October, but I'll shoot for
Yeah,
September.
okay.
okay.
if that's doable, that would be.
You're thinking as a whole, right? Thinking
Yeah.
as a whole.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, September would be good, because I think August should be pretty light and, quick.
August, we usually look at the year-end fund balance and how we ended the year, and that'll play into
Yeah,
what we have to work with for budget.
okay. All right. Anything else? Hearing none, we'll move on to the approval of the June 20 minutes. A motion would be in order to approve as presented.
I will move to approve the agenda.
The minutes.
I'm sorry, the minutes, sorry, I looked at the agenda when I said
We're
that.
already in the agenda.
Sorry. Oh,
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Warrants, everyone receives their warrants via email, via your GRCSU email. If you have any questions, you should direct questions to Louis about the warrants. A motion would be in order to approve the warrants.
I'll make the motion.
Motion by Mike, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Contract recommendations. Now, some of these you received via your email, and we talked about this prior, that when we have gaps between meetings and we have people that we need to hire, they're sent to the board chair and then sent out for any kind of response to Chris. When Chris doesn't hear back, a contract is then offered. So this is affirming those. So it's for support staff, custodian at Polteny Elementary, extracurricular is for Todd Montana, summer school teacher, Michaela Woodbury, 7-8, Polteny High School cheerleading, Alexandra Fox, Proctor High School curriculum planning, which is summer, Brittany Coop, Polteny,
Bradley, sorry.
what did I say?
Brittany. Bradley.
Oh, Bradley Coop, sorry. Oh, yeah. Polteny Elementary 3-4 co-ed soccer coach, Keith Harrington, Polteny Elementary Vermont History Day advisor, Keith Harrington, Polteny Elementary athletic scheduler, Chad Pulver, Polteny Elementary 5-6 basketball coach, Philip Whitman, Polteny Elementary 5-6 co-ed soccer coach, and Gary Hodder, Proctor High School varsity coach. Any questions about any of those? A motion would be in order to approve as presented.
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Nate, discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Finance, Louis.
I have nothing further tonight.
Okay. So we discussed the budget timeline. Tomorrow night we'll be meeting for our board retreat here, in person only. And so things you want to be thinking about is what our vision is after kind of listening to building principals and talk about what their wish list is, talk about, looking at numbers in their classroom, some of the discussion that took place here. So what we see is that vision when we talk about unification for Quarry Valley, as well as, one or two goals. And we've talked about this before, that being responsible in the setting of goals, that we have one superintendent, so Chris is just not the superintendent for Quarry Valley, that he is for, other districts as well. So while the goals we're looking at should encompass all of our schools, they should also have, or it should have an overall arching presence for unification within the SU as well. So that, and that will be happening through the strategic plan and portrait of graduate also. But if there is something specific that we're looking at, we've talked a lot about curriculum, we've talked a lot about, different things. So, seeing what the board wants to do. All right, future agenda meetings, we'll put the policy that Chris spoke about tonight that discuss the number of students in a class. And so we'll have that on in August to, just for discussion. All right, because that would have to go to the policy committee, but we could discuss that and talk about numbers and things like that. Also in August, we're going to move the meeting from August 15th to August 9th.
That's good for me, actually.
At 6:15, correct?
At 6:15.
That's a Tuesday, right?
Yes.
Would we have both an in-person and?
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll have a hybrid meeting.
And did I hear the admin are not requested at that meeting?
The admin are not required to attend, but we are going to be discussing the classroom policy. So if there's something you wanted to submit, you could certainly do that to Kristen, and she could add it to our packets.
I actually have on Tuesday the 9th the communication.
So we can.
Well, we're gonna meet after
prior to
that.
that, and then if you want, we could still do that, or we can reschedule, whatever you want to.
What time is that meeting?
It's supposed to be 5:30 to 6:30, but
Okay.
I'll see if we can just try to move it up.
5:15 to 6, or 5 to 6.
I'll try to have my brain on straight that day.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
maybe just 45 minutes rather than an hour.
Okay.
All right. Anything else? All right. We will see everyone tomorrow night. A motion will be in order to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
All right. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.